So pleased and honored that you're able to be here today with us. We're really looking forward to this interactive, interesting, but also fun session about women in space. First, my colleague Chantal will talk about Spacesuits.
So we're here on behalf of Spacesuits, which is a platform that's been built to connect people in the space industry, so space enthusiasts, space professionals, industry leaders. So that platform is being built to help the space industry grow. So that's how we're contributing.
So my name is Gabriella Obispa. I have a background in technology and law, and I'm also now a lecturer at the Hogeschool Rotterdam as a lecturer for the subject ethics with technology and law. And that's also
we're both moderating the panel discussion. My name is Chantal Sitaram. I also have the same background in international technology and law, and I work as a legal advisor, and I'm currently busy with research about space law and liability and satellite signals, non-functioning satellite signals, and autonomous vehicles. So
that's what we are. So women in space. If you've noticed, space industry is growing. It's a very new area that we are discovering. So, so think for example about space tourism, and in that reason we have a big impact on how it's going to look like. And that's why we're here today to really matters. That we're here today to discuss this topic because we have an impact on the future of space.
So in line with the theme of the Global Space Week, we decided to make the same theme for this panel discussion. So it's about women in space, and we would like to celebrate the achievements and the significant roles that women have played in the space industry and history, and but more focus on the future and how to inspire young women and to contribute in the space industry. So that's how we would like to change the face of space.
Yes.
So to test your knowledge a bit about how much you know about women in space, we would like to ask you to visit this website, www.kahoot.it. Yes, you all can.
Sorry.
We were also good left our phones.
Do you want to participate, or do you think or
we'll just participate old school?
Okay, then after, okay, because otherwise it's going to be they're going to know all.
So this is the pin you can enter.
Freya is representing you.
Yes. I don't know if that's a smart decision.
You're a space enthusiast.
Yeah, it's good.
Ready, I think? Everybody ready?
One minute.
Yeah.
You start.
Should I restart this? Wait, then there's another pin coming. Sorry.
Sorry.
We have to we start the whole game.
Is er een prijs te winnen van de...
Je wordt altijd bedankt wel, hè? Deze mensen
A trip into space.
Oh, that's a good one.
We give you back food.
Ready? Yes, and I will start it now if everybody's ready. Okay, first question. Women's space? Who was the first woman to go into space? It's Stephanie Wilson, Valentina Tereshkova, Mae Jemison, or Sally Ride?
Yes, this I know.
Yes.
Yes. Yay.
Seven people were right. Okay, next question.
I see everyone that's
Yeah.
oh, you're very fast.
A total of 566 people have traveled to space. How many of them were women? 65, 12, 114, or 245? $65? Nobody. We are still space plans are forming. What is the leaky pipe phenomenon? Women who pursue careers outside of STEM, term of for the most in-demand STEM professionals, discrimination and challenges causing women to stop pursuing STEM professions, and the legal boundaries women must overcome to obtain an education in STEM.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Oh.
Yeah,
I don't think everybody answered.
It's quick, yes. Sorry.
Go here.
Yeah. No female has ever walked on the moon. Is that true or false? Blue is true, red is false. Oh, one person thought.
Sheila Armstrong.
Who was the first African-American female astronaut? Was it Katherine Jackson, Janet Epps, Mae Jemison, or Joan Higginbotham? Katherine Jackson. Yeah, the first one was Mae Jemison. Oh, there was.
Good job.
Why was NASA's first all-female spacewalk cancelled? The women weren't happy enough, the women would not get along with each other for a longer period of time, exposure to radiation above the Earth's magnetic field would be too harmful, or lack of right-sized spacesuits. For blue?
Okay, I was selecting the blue one.
Okay, last question, guys. It's the final one. Ji So-young was the first Korean woman to fly into space. What did she bring to the ISS for a scientific experiment? Protein crystals, a 3D printer, a monkey, or 1,000 fruit flies? Yes. So, 2 people. Okay. Okay. Final. Number 3, Ramon. Well done. Big one for number 2. Number 1. Mia.
Okay. Yeah, so as you can see, there's a lot to learn more about women in space, so there's still room for improving our knowledge. Now we go into the panelists, and if you want to, you can introduce yourself, and we can start with Enrique.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for inviting me.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Well, I'm Enrique Obispa. I'm from Mexico. I studied technology law at the FU Amsterdam. Now I'm doing business law. I'm a tech enthusiast. I'm also a content creator and marketing strategies for companies. I'm always focused on what's happening in the tech world.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie. I'm part of the Walmart organization. I came here with Alice. I'm from Switzerland, based in Geneva. So Walmart organizes all-female space astronaut missions, and I'm also an early career researcher in astrobiology.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Andrea. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Amsterdam. I am a space enthusiast, but my actual research expertise is in acceptance of disruptive innovations, space being one of them, but also artificial intelligence, cyborgism, virtual and augmented reality, and I also look at ethical and regulatory movements to make our interaction with technology safe and inclusive for everyone.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. Hello everyone, my name is Alice. My background is in aerospace engineering. I specialize in applied mathematics. And I'm here with Julie. I'm part of the Women's Crew, which is an all-female mission to the MDRS, and will be the crew data scientist to that mission. And on the side, my main job is working at the space agency where I work as a geospatial analytics engineer.
Yes, we go to the directions. Yes, so you were talking about Walmart first, very interesting. And I will start with the Walmart question. And so Walmart envisions, inspire and drive an inclusive human presence in space, and aims to also contribute to filling the gender gap in STEM. So my question is, how is Walmart contributing to a more inclusive future of space exploration?
So I think that Walmart has two branches. First, there's a technical branch, probably Alice will talk a bit more about it. And there's a space education branch of Walmart. So that's the side I'm the most involved with. So if we think about space exploration or trying to settle down another planet, we're really thinking about trying to export humanity on another planetary body. And humanity, well, it's made of all humans, both men, women, other genders, and all ethnic backgrounds or religions. So we really need to also export all this diversity of humanity on other planetary bodies. And this is really what we want to advocate for through space education outreach events. We really would like to create this network of space workers, space students, school students, where mostly women can exchange on their experience or maybe their concerns or doubts about being young women in the space industry.
And I mean, on the technological side, I think space is a very exciting field. I think everyone here in this room would agree. So I think it's also a great way to stimulate education about this, because everyone likes about space. Everyone is asking, oh, why is this thing blue? What is beyond Earth? So it's a great way to introduce children and get them interested in STEM. And so you must also have a technological branch where we try to find technological partners to do experiments with us on our missions. And also, there is with fewer women going to space and being in that field, we have also less data collected about this. And of course, I mean, we are here at the World AI, so know that less data will, of course, create a bias in the analysis that we do. So one of our goals, we are not there yet, but we need to collect a bit more data about women and how they would behave in this kind of situation where we are going to go in the Andrea. So that's part of the technological part of it, and filling that data gap really.
Oh, amazing. I have a question. Can you explain more about an all-female space analog
missions.
The Mars Desert Research Station?
So,
yes.
Yeah, so what Alice mentioned, the Andrea stands for the Mars Desert Research Station. So it's what we call an analog station, and it is operated by the Mars Society in the United States. It's actually in the desert of Utah. So what we mean by analog is that it reproduces one or more conditions of other planetary bodies, like the Moon or, for instance, Mars. So there, the analogy with Mars comes from the landscape around the station. So it's in the desert, it's very dry, very arid, and also the rocks that we can find there are very similar to the rocks we could find on Mars. So this is what we call analog. And also it is a very confined environment. We actually have, later we can show, I brought a picture of the station in the PowerPoint. So it's a very confined habitat. Yeah, maybe we can show it now.
Yes.
On the second slide.
Yeah.
So this is what the station looks like. Here we have the main habitat, so it's called the hab. This is where we will be living for 2 weeks. So you can see we're 6 of us. It's quite small, it's very confined. It tries to reproduce the kind of conditions we would be in if we were to settle on Mars at some point.
Quite isolated, limited access to the internet, communications outside, like everything is quite controlled to kind of give us an isolation feeling. Right?
Exactly. And we can see the landscape around it. So I don't know if you saw already satellite images of Mars, but it looks very similar to what we could find on Mars. The rocks are very similar to the geomorphology, the form of the terrain with canyons. We have also what we call paleo rivers, so all the river beds, stuff like that. And all of this we can find it on the surface of Mars as well. So this is why the station is called analog, and this is why it makes sense to do research there as well.
And also it's the activities we do in the sense that there are, so what you see, we have also like rovers that we can use to explore the area, and we have like this EVA suits that and essentially we don't have the right to just open the door and be like, go forward, right? We are supposed to be on Mars, so if we go outside, we have to put on this heavy EVA suit. We have to know how it works, because if it breaks down, maybe there will be humidity, or we have, and we have to be prepared in case of a break in the system. And we have to plan missions and get them approved by mission control. And we go on mission, and we have maybe a mission, maybe we want to deploy an instrument. Maybe we want to take measurements in the field. Usually we have a joint project where essentially what we want to do is to go and look at what kind of rocks we can find and do really manual identification. And we want to use a specific camera, we have a spectral camera to do that and combine the two. So these are police rock samples associated with remote sensing. And in that context of the project, essentially what we want to do is study in situ resources utilization. So this is the paradigm in which, if you want to have a sustainable presence of men on another planet or on the moon, we have to use what's there, right? So we have to know what we have at our disposal and how we can best utilize it to create a more sustainable life there. So essentially, that is in that context, usually that we use this product. Sorry, I kind of went a bit sideways. So we're doing an evolution. So
it's you can just talk as much about it. So very fascinating. I think the public also finds it very interesting. So please don't. Yeah. So because so I yeah. So we also that's one way that you're going to contribute to more women inclusivity, because now there's not enough data of women. You said lacking of data.
Well, in fact, I think we will be the first all-female nation since like 10 years or something like this. So yes, I don't have the statistics for the specific station, but I would bet there is more men than women that we have. So
and will you be going to the market station?
Well, actually, we were supposed to be there now, but as some of you might have heard, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so US borders are still closed, and we have postponed 1 year, so we will go hopefully in October 2022.
Very nice. So now I have a question about only 2 years ago, the first all-female spacewalk took place. There's much more to be done to increase women's representation in space exploration, right? So what's the impact of you collecting data, scientific, social, and medical, and doing research on women's behavior and performance in space-like environments? Like maybe a very broad.
Yeah, well, I guess as I was saying, and maybe I can explain a bit on that, there is a kind of a data gap, and essentially we don't know what we don't know, right? So just building up a bit on history, like when it was pushed, when we at the very beginning of human space exploration, when it was questioned whether women could go into space, you had like an old male NASA engineer being like, how would period work into space? Isn't that very dangerous? And we just don't know, so we have to collect the data. So now we know. I mean, we have had a lot of women into space, and everything went fine, nothing exploded. So I guess that's fine. And also now, I think it was Peggy Whitson who said that women are more likely to spend on average 50% less time in space, because as you might know, space is a very dangerous environment. Of course, we know that. And you have like harmful radiation coming from the sun, coming from the cosmic rays. And so it is supposedly more dangerous for women because we have a tendency to have breast cancers, ovarian cancers, and this we don't know until we take this data, right? So I guess this is building towards that. So we are going to collect a little data when we're going to our very little scale, but I mean, hopefully this is
what are the domains in your team? So what are the experts? So you have, I think, astrobiology.
Yeah, so I have background in astrobiology, so it's essentially looking for extraterrestrial life. I specialized in what is called in situ biosignatures, so signs of life that we could find in rocks, for example, like the experiments that the Perseverance rover is undertaking right now. So Alice is into data. Present yourself.
So I'm into data, so my background is being aerospace engineer, applied mathematics, so I like doing math, and so collecting data, looking what we can find into it, and it's really what I like. And also my background, what I'm doing now, I'm into Earth observation, which means collecting satellite images and trying to extract value and information out of it. And I've already started to look into satellite images of the surrounding of the station, and trying to see if I can find zones that have consistency, etc. So this is what I'm doing, and maybe want to do the rest of the team.
Yeah, the rest of the team. So we have Lorraine. She's her background is in aerospace engineering as well. She specialized in Mars transportation systems, I think. Yeah, very specialized. Space transportation systems. Yeah. And then we have Marta. She's currently finishing. She just finished her PhD in materials science, space materials, in the UK. Christina has a background as well in engineering, and she's currently working in the virtual reality, I think. Yeah. And finally, Paula, she's a biologist. She's doing her PhD in neurobiology in Spain.
Oh, wow. So those different domains, they can contribute to a whole collecting, and that can contribute to the inclusiveness of women in space. And so materials, like what kind of materials, like how can I think,
So I think I believe she had a project on how to design gloves for spacesuits, EVA gloves. So you have to find these exactly resistant to the harmful radiations. Or we're talking at some point of developing those gloves to take on Mars, because there's a lot of wind and it's very dusty. So you need to have materials that are resistant to that. Yeah. So
it's very cool. Okay. Let me see. Yes. So let me see. Wait 1 second. Yeah, so it's including gender factors in design of human spaceflight experiments vital for the future of space, because you talked about it's being unsafe for women if you don't think about a gender factor. So what's your opinion on that? And maybe you can all.
I think it's also mostly for now space exploration has been designed for men and then kind of accommodated for women. We saw that with the EVA suits, where they were designed for like male-sized suits, and then they were adapted for women. I think there was something as well with the toilets that was not suitable for women in the ISS. So this is the kind of thing maybe to start thinking of like how we can take the entire humanity as well instead of just half of it.
Exactly. And are you also going to think about it in your research? Are you also going to think about, for example, the spacesuits or those kind of things? Or
so we don't have specific experiments per se on spacesuits, but they will be part of our daily life. As one day out of two, we will be either like going out with them on ourselves and just going into the desert with them. So we have to trust them, or either we'll be on the other side controlling and the mission from the heart. So they are not per se part of our research, but they will be part of our daily life, just like those are part of
okay. So yeah. Yes.
So yeah, it's like in other industries, we see that there is like a gender bias, obviously, but also within the female group that there can be ethnical bias. So do you expect that to that will be taken into the space industry too, or?
Well, it definitely should be. And right now, our vision is to drive a more inclusive space exploration. Turns out that we're all European women in the team, but we definitely want to extend to a better diversity. I'm not sure anything to add.
No, I just totally agree with you. I mean, that is it just happened because of the history as well of how we were funded. That's happened so, but of course, what we would like is to explain the mission. I mean, that has no boundaries essentially.
Yeah.
So there's a chance the next woman, the next person could be a woman on the moon. So the next there's a chance the next person on the moon could be a woman of color. That's
could definitely be. I think the next mission to the moon is Artemis, right? Yeah, and I think that out of the 15 selected astronauts, 8 of them were women, including women of color.
So we feel like the perfect 50-50.
Yeah.
And
so it could definitely happen.
Yeah.
So what are the challenges that you're foreseeing for making the space industry more inclusive? So what are the challenges you will see, for example, going to doing research for a Mars desert station? What are do you think that you might have the challenges?
Well, I think that so far the Mars project itself received a lot of traction, and a lot of people were very interested by it. So we're very grateful. I don't think that we went across major challenges so far. I mean, it's just 2 years old, this project, so hopefully there's going to be many more years ahead of us. From my personal experience, I know that I received a lot of support from my supervisors in research. I didn't really feel any discrimination or anything like that, but I know that it's the daily life of a lot of women. But from my personal experience,
Yes. Yeah, me neither. I mean, in fact, I think this is actually a good news because me neither. I never quite had any problems while I was trying to pursue STEM. So, like from a very young kid, I was a bit of a nerd. Like I asked for telescope, microscopes, and like chemistry kits to do disgusting slime for Christmas. So, I mean, I was always supported by my parents. In school, I never had problems because I was a girl. It just turns out that when I was doing my aerospace degree, there was one girl for 7 guys, and that's just the way it is. And I mean, it refers also to one of the questions we had in the quiz, which is like this leaky pipe, where I mean, starting from a very young age, like there is no bias for guys being better at math than girls. There is absolutely no bias, and just builds up as maybe a heritage of our history. Also because when you look at Nobel Prizes, very little women, especially when in the field of STEM. And this year there was no woman for the Nobel in STEM as well. I think it's this kind of thing. So I think we are definitely going in the right direction because I think women from our generation and in our countries, I don't think we face many issues. There probably still some, but it's also integration of our history and how it was in the past that's still impacting us today. Like it's just people who are like at the top of their career right now, 60. Well, 40 years ago, it was not as easy as it was for us. So of course there is less women, and so it's just going to be, I think, that gradually goes in the right direction, generation after generation.
That's an interesting point. Yes, thank you. That's
Maybe
great.
maybe I'm going to chip in and contradict, not forcefully with your experiences because I can't contradict that. But if I look at generations, I have a feeling that I might be in the older generation or the second came. So I think that there is a little bit of a movement where we see less often bias. However, if you look at radical numbers, I think that does not really support personal experience so much, right? So I'm not specifically talking about the space industry. I think you guys have made very clear that there's a number of issues there. But if you look at STEM or generally or technology, from my personal experience, we are really, really far from that. So I teach and I interact with the tech industry on a daily level. And I have my core 2 quota females that I invite into any panel, into any keynote. And I think the representation is still very, very largely masculine and male dominated. And when we go beyond the gender elements and we look at minority representation, it looks much more gloomy than that. And I sincerely hope that what we see, what you guys' personal experience was in terms of how school was, our parenting was, I sincerely hope that we can expand that to, let's say, other countries, other personal stories, because there's still so much work to do. And I think the space industry in that sense is not largely different from many of the other STEM and or tech industries. Yeah. So I'm sorry to be the voice of
Actually, I absolutely agree because that was the first thing I thought. First of all, congratulations because it's a really nice project.
Absolutely.
But still, there is so much to do in let's say, Latin America, the African continent, where women there, they don't dream of becoming astronauts, because it's not a possibility. So instead, they still need to dream, I can become a doctor, I can become a lawyer still, So maybe better actions needs to be taken here first, so in our planet, to also include more women in these kind of missions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we are lucky in our personal cases in in Europe, where we have quite good. I mean, of course, still with some margin to improve, but we are quite lucky in terms of equality of genders. It's written in our constitution, for example. But I agree that it's very different depending on where you're born. Right? So this is totally.
It's also a question of first step versus large leap, right? I mean, what you guys are doing is exactly that. You are European women that make a contribution in a very, very largely underrepresented field, gender-wise. and that's an extremely important step. Is it the leap for women in STEM? Probably not, and that's fine because all of these individual small steps are ultimately creating a leap. So I think that I'm extremely happy to hear that your personal experiences look like that. It gives me hope.
Yes.
So, and Nike, do you when you were talking about the biases we have here on Earth, but do you think artificial intelligence will take the bias into the space industry too? If we think a bit ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very, a valid question because, if we go downstairs, we see all of these companies with the word transparency in AI, how to make AI ethical. They are all working to solve this specific problem now. So I think we will take what we create here on Earth, and I think there are I'm optimistic that we will find a solution, and probably the commercial sphere here will find that solution in the technical aspect of the AI, and also, I think artificial intelligence per se is a reflection of humanity, a reflection of the human mind and how we act. So initiatives like this, the promotion of dreaming of becoming an astronaut, that will potentially also change the outcome of this tool that we are creating right now. So yeah, I think there's still hope, and that we won't take an early version of AI into space.
There's something very similar about the challenges that the AI community faces and what you said about recreating humanity on space, right? Because ultimately what we're trying to do in artificial intelligence, the name literally is artificial intelligence, is we're trying to recreate human intelligence. And human intelligence is inherently diverse. There's research supported by MIT that the emotion capacity of AI is largely biased because it's mostly programmed by Indian and Asian young male, where their emotional capacity is very valid, but it's not representative of our global emotional capacity. And in that sense, the challenge that we have in the AI community is so very similar, right? Because you're looking at a subset of a certain part of the global variety that is going to be inbuilt into these new agents. And I think in a way, space, we're doing the same. It's not so much that we create new agents, but we bring a subset of agents to another planet. And in that sense, there's so many similarities about fairness and how is that, for example, construed, and what is gender diversity, what is balance, how many people should be there. We have the exact same challenges. And I do agree that the AI community has started to look at this commercially, and we're at least opening up the discussion. But I also think that if you're thinking about these areas being so similar, the starting point is indeed to bring diversity at a very, very early stage, right? So the more you have a different set of coders that all bring their own understanding of emotional capability, the more you would represent the global space. And the same for what you guys are doing. The more you're able to bring in people from the start, the more you would not retrospectively have to try. This is what we see in AI, right? We're starting to retrospectively try to kind of build out the human biases that we've built in. So it's pretty much exactly the same in the space industry. Now we're starting to restart. Had there been women from the start, spacesuits would look differently. So I think that is where our old passions kind of combine. It's how can we bring these young people into the game so that we don't have to retrospectively fix stuff. Sorry, that's it was. You just gave me the.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think the advantage now is that space is going to the commercial sphere.
Yes.
And that is not only government.
Yeah.
Finance a mission to space. Yeah, there are also other things that I think as a lawyer right now that where is this going to happen, and then countries will adapt these new these regulations to make it happen. Let's say Luxembourg. Why are space companies based in a tiny country such as Luxembourg? Well, because it has regulations that allow to create a company, and they don't have like the nation, like the nation aspect. Let's say that if you found a company in the United States, they all need to be American and not in Luxembourg. So I think commerce will also help to maybe not solve this problem, but to make it more for everyone.
Do you feel that in the
Democratic.
space industry? I'm very curious about it because you girls are so much closer to do you think commercial efforts are helpful or are they a hindrance?
I think that it's double-sided. I think it's great that there are private space companies. We see thousands of space startups being created, and it's really expanding to other industries. And space is not only for space agencies anymore, and I think this is great. But should we commercialize space anyway? What would be our motives to settle down on Mars? Is it for commercial reasons? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure it's very ethical. I'm not so sure that as humans we can allow ourselves to colonize other planets. So I think it's really double-sided.
Yeah, it is, because I think it's related with history. I mean, it was the same question before, are we allowed to colonize other continents?
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, at least we're wondering if it is. I don't think that they actually asked themselves before if we're allowed to colonize other continents. But at least the discussion is open.
So, according to you, when would there be enough gender diversity given the space industry? When would it be equal according to you? What do you think?
I think I get inspired by you, because you talk about cyborgism. There is a new, it's not very new, but a philosophy of becoming equal in this way, which becoming half robot, half human could help maybe to fill this gap. And also I had a professor at the field that he was saying that the future is transsexual or transgender, so that we could also modify our body to look equal and to have the same opportunities and to experience the world the same way. I mean, maybe it's a radical thought, but
would you say like a 50-50 would be justified? Would that justify how women have experienced everything in the past? Would that be equal according to you?
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I also think there is a bit. Numbers are great, but they don't always tell the truth. Like, for example, you would see that there is 25% of women in space, but only 12% are in the technical part, and the rest would be in support functions. So I think it's a bit hard to resume, to summarize the reality between of a number 50-50. I guess equality would be, for me, is equality of chances, right? Across gender, but also we are talking about it across borders, right? So it's giving everyone a shot, and if there is only 40-60, at least there is no young girl that was like, oh, I wish I was an astronaut, but my mom wanted me to take literature. Then I guess I don't really care about the number. It's just a matter of everyone doing what they want and what they can. So, yeah.
I think that gender equality would be, to my opinion, reached when it would be normal to have an all-female crew of astronauts going to space, or an all-female board of a big 500 companies, for example.
It is such a challenging question, though, right? Because you're ultimately going into quotas, and you could make the argument that women have been in a disadvantage for many years, so now maybe they should be in an advantage for a couple of years to kind of compensate for that system, which is what we see. And then people come in with reverse discrimination arguments, and on an individual level, they're actually rational and they're reasonable, right? Also, the same applies to minorities, by the way. I'm saying that. I think ultimately, what we would all wish is that we could start on a clean slate where all of these characteristics would be completely ignored, right? That would be fantastic. If we could just wash out history, we could just wash out all of that and say, let's make decisions that are not based on race, not based on gender, not based. And then we also learned that human upholds implicit biases, and we know that history took place. And I think that makes this space extremely difficult. And then, like you said, if you put a number on it and say, okay, let's make it 50-50, or we make it 70-30 because it used to be 30-70, you bring this on a level of ultimate and certain conflict. Because then, people have their opinions. And again, I think the only way to deal with that, and I think I'm very aligned with your opinion there, is at least in terms of accessibility to opportunity and education, there is the only way that we can work. And then that also, of course, implies association change, right? What would people think about gender minorities in certain professions? Kind of try our best to at least reduce implicit biases that people uphold. And it's such a challenging job. And I think that's why we've been busy with it for years and still far from actually reaching the goal. But I also think anything that is going into hard numbers, like since 50-50 is fair, is a very, very dangerous way to go. Because, and you kind of said it in the beginning, when we say 50-50, we're making again an assumption that we are looking at binary genders. Not the reality, luckily, anymore. And then it gets very difficult in numbers. It's like 10% for 15% for 10%. So yeah, the more we can, I think, step out of that and just think about it as an equal space of opportunity and education, the more we are preparing young people to be of equal choice.
So if we stay in that utopian point of view, without the gender gap in the space industry, what kind of impact would that have, you think, on the world and society? How do you think the world would look like without the gender gap, if we compare it to the situation we are in?
I think there have been studies that show that having a diverse board of directors or having a diverse company leads to more creativity, leads to more revenue. I mean, I think there have been a number of studies, and I won't be able to know the figures by heart, follow me, but there have been several studies showing that, looking at the diversity of the board, but not on the gender, like all diversity as a like really broad sense, and looking at like metrics like how much money, how much patents, this kind of stuff, and it's shown that having a diverse crowd also means diverse point of view, and taking a problem from different angle is more likely to give you the right answer, right? So I guess it's not specific to space. It's just like all aspects of life. Is it the case? I believe.
Yeah. But let's think about space for a minute. Like, what will be the impact of closing gender gap for space? Like,
Probably it's an unbiased focus on skill, right? I mean, that would be ultimately the dream utopian world. If you could take out, because what you also see is that women, for example, are holding back on certain skill sets that are inherent to their gender because they want to overcompensate for gender biases. So I wished, if I think about it in general sense, and then also for space, if we can get back to each individual contributing their personality and skill set, I think that would lead the same as it did in other industries in the space industry to a more quality and more innovative environment. And therefore, hopefully, something that can contribute to humanity. If we assume that going to space contributes to humanity, which I hear is that might be tricky in itself.
that's an list. And yes. Then So Andrea, you were talking about STEM field a lot and the underrepresentation of minorities and gender and women. So what are the factors you think for these underrepresentation? So are the factors, in the sense why are women not being represented enough in STEM fields? What's going on?
Yeah, that's not really an opinion question, that's really a fact question, right? We know that they're not equal opportunity, and I'm talking about that in terms of actual accessibility of hard education, but also a lot of associative issues, right? I think stigmas, stereotypes, people's beliefs that they can contribute, and I think that is partially a sociological issue. Can come from parents. You were saying it, right? It's like the parents might say you should study literature. You were bringing in a cultural perspective even. So there are several components that contribute to the underrepresentation. And none of them are in itself, they're all interlinked in addition to, the problem becomes bigger because they're all interlinked. So when I grew up in a field where my parents signaled that being a male ballet dancer is not something that is acceptable, of course I'm also going to look at that young person, probably looking less at opportunities to educate him or herself in that space, etc., etc. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. And I think it contributes of both accessibility and stigmas that together bring the challenges to and actually I kind of keep referring to young people, but it's not a young people problem. To people. So people in their later stages of their career lives would face very similar challenges, in addition to ageism. So
what are your ideas about creating more opportunities for women in this field?
Yeah. I'm going to bring this into my personal experience set because there's ample research that gives some answers to that. But at the point that people interact with me as a professor, they usually have made some choices in their life. And in my particular field, I look at the psychology of technology. People are usually in fields like psychology and marketing. You may have more female students. So for me personally, what I try to do is to make people understand that technology and space are both industries that ultimately have an interdisciplinary component. So let's say that the challenges that you have as a female, and you might not feel fully comfortable because of all the things I've just laid out, to go full in on math and chemistry and slime as a 13-year-old, that does not mean that these industries should be closed off to you. So what I'm saying is, in addition to trying to make opportunities more accessible in STEM, also see opportunities to contribute to these industries from the fields that we have powerful female representation. Right? So I'm not a coder. I can code for personal pleasure. People that code would say I don't code, and that's fine. But I have contributed to the industry from a perspective of psychology, philosophy, and ethics. And like you pointed out, these are topics that are actually now recognized in the field. And through that door, I have started to speak the lingua of STEM. I have interacted with people more, and it allows that barrier to be perceivably smaller. And now I'm, thinking about doing a degree in physics for my personal pleasure. So that is not something I would have done at the age of 18. And it's a bit of a weird way in, but I think it's an acceptable way of it in addition to what these young women here are doing, which is much more directly contributing and encouraging women to contribute to STEM fields.
Yes, because I want to ask about the role models. You have also the role model part and the mentoring. Can you tell a bit more about that and how it's contributing to a more inclusive space?
Yeah. So role models, every time that we think about more diversity in the space field, or more specifically about how to encourage girls and women contribute to the space exploration sector, these two words, role models, always come up. And it is extremely important to have role models. And those 10% of female astronauts are doing an amazing job at being role models. But I see a bit of limitation for role models. First, I think that nobody should aspire to become someone else in themselves. And I think that role models tend to set professional standards. So if you want to be in their position, you should follow their footsteps. And I think that there are as many paths to space exploration that there are people willing to contribute to space exploration. And so you were saying that now psychology and marketing is actually recognized in the STEM field and also in space exploration. Well, it didn't used to be like that. And I think we should really emphasize, and role models should also be about advocating for more diversity in the technical part of space exploration. And I think also that role models, even the best role model ever, and there are a lot of them, will never really replace a real life experience, a real life opportunity. but again, I'm not arguing the importance and the relevance of role models. I still have role models. Everybody should have role models, but it's not the main driver of space education, I think. But mentoring, on the other part, having more like local and relatable people that can give us support and guidance, I think this really adds this other like closer experience to space education, I think. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, but it's like nothing theoretical. It's just as a young girl, I was at my summer camps. I wanted to do science as well, so I went to like science camps, and it was actually great because like I was in a dorm full of girls that were also like kind of a bit nerdy like me, and I chose a summer camp that was about astronomy, so that was super cool because we got to stay up late to look at the stars, and you know, we had like it was just people teaching us like cool stuff, fun stuff about stars and how like what our universe is made of, and I was very small, I was like 12 or something like this. And I think like this, like as you were saying, like local initiatives like summer camps or weekends or going to the museum is sparks interest because it's normal to, like it's very natural to get an interest in astronomy if you remember it as like spending a good time with your friends looking into a telescope and you're like, oh, this is whatever, this is a planet, this is a star, and it's donut shaped and it's fun, and yeah, so I just think there is something very important and also local and 0 kilometer kind of inspiration, let's say.
We need to reward mentoring again. No? I mean, if you look back in history and Greek times, this was such a fundamental part of how society worked, right? People were teachers, and I'm not talking about actual teachers, but teachers in a much more general sense. And I think what you said about mentoring, and that also kind of connects back to local experience, because often mentoring, these days it doesn't have to be, but it is often geographical. It's people that we can relate to. The problem is that in our society, we've kind of stepped away of actually rewarding that as an individual behavior, right? You see it in certain industries and you have formal programs or you have a university professor, but that much more like non-organized, informal, let's take a role in society and help someone is something that has washed out a bit. And I think that would be fundamentally important to reintroduce. And also to build platforms to actually facilitate that, so that people who don't usually have access, they get access. And you see that a little bit, but I think that could be done more. Even I really just go back to my school and talk. Who does that, right? I mean, some people do, but the majority don't. Everybody has their story, and I think that would be really nice to see that come back, and it would help with these experiences.
So stories, mentoring, those are the things we have to focus on more to get space industry more.
If I can maybe add something, I think something that's often overlooked in like all fields where women are a minority is that it can feel quite threatening if as a woman you're interested in something, but there's a lot of men because you can just feel unsafe. And I think that's something that often, it doesn't really get attention. So people are like, oh, but we give opportunities and we're organizing these things and women can come here, but they just feel unsafe. And if you feel unsafe, especially when you're young, you're just not going to do it. You're going to the class where all the girls are because it's more comfortable.
That's a great point. Which wants to react to that?
No, I completely agree. It can be very intimidating to enter a room where there's only men. Actually, 3 weeks ago we had the same discussion panel with Lorraine and Alice, and I entered this room and there were 10 like older men, and I felt really uncomfortable. Also, I was a bit late because I didn't have access to the building, etc. So I entered the door, I opened the door, everybody was looking at me. There was no free seats. I had to take a seat on the other. So I completely relate to what you just said. Yeah.
So all the old men that
So I guess what you're saying is like we don't only need role models that are in a way above us, but we also need peers, like people that are side by side to go somewhere. So yeah, I think that's also very important. I still agree.
From a male perspective.
No, I mean, I was smiling because, I was thinking here that the society comes like freely to organize themselves and like to organize with the same interests. So that here there are more associations and there are more recreational activities to promote exactly this. So I mean, yeah, that's why I was smiling, because it's something that we need to do even more. We learn because we have fun. We interact. We come to school to share our ideas with our peers. So yeah, I think we need more initiatives like this, even like this room right now.
Yes. Social safety goes far beyond women and men, right? So what you're explaining, that feeling of going into a room as a young female researcher in academia, I can tell you it's a very common phenomenon. But if you extrapolate from the classroom, it's a discussion that we have that goes way beyond, right? We have minorities, we have, for example, sexual orientations that don't feel very safe and well represented. And there's a lot of good tools that can help to overcome social safety issues. For example, connecting people of similar interests before you actually enter the room so that you have the body to kind of go to. You have anonymous links, for example, that you provide for people to report that they feel that way, because often organizers don't deliberately set it up. Like I said, I have my poor 2 female quota panelists, but if they can't do, then I have my male panel just by accessibility. But I think it requires a lot of commitment from organizers of such events, but also from a classroom, a teacher, and from society at large to even just think about it. And that has not been done, right? I never got an email from a conference saying, yeah, you're 3% of the female academics here. Here are the other, 2.9%, so that you guys can already click. Would have actually been helpful, I think.
Nice idea.
Well, it's also a little bit difficult because you are recreating a certain subculture, and then you have the 3% females that probably hang out in the corner because they were connected in the beginning. But I think something like that, this is an overly simplified example, thinking about this and thinking about ways that we can help with that would already be a great step one.
I agree. I think that's an amazing idea, actually. I was thinking about this. Me as a lecturer, of course, I'm having students in the students on the feature. I'm like, yeah, that's a great way of making them feel safe and making them feel also seen and heard. And so I agree. That's great. So,
that's what you had naturally in the camp.
Yeah,
right?
So indeed, I got to meet girls that were a bit like me, so that was just nice to feel like this. So yeah, it was about my buddies.
I also find a common interest here. I mean that we like to move to other places. We like to discover new countries, new cities. That also makes you think about who you are, and to be true to yourself, like not trying to be somebody else and pretending to be that person just to like so these people to like me. So that also helps a lot to know who you are and to stay true to that, right?
I was just wondering about space in that context, because we know from research that if you are bringing people into a group of common interests, like, for example, all the females pre-conference will be connected. And I wonder if you would say that space facilitates that, because in the end, we all knew on space, right? So is that something where social safety might be less needed, or would people just kind of repeat the patterns that they have implemented on Earth? I'm actually not sure about that, but I was just questioning that. Like, if you're a bunch of people on a new planet, do your individual differences become amplified or reduced?
I think that I think that astronauts aren't astronauts because they're like experts in a specific field. I think that they're among the most reliable human beings because I didn't apply to be an astronaut, so I'm not talking about myself. But because they know and they understand and they trust their emotions and their body capabilities, and they know that they can rely on themselves. So in the end, they are kind of experts in themselves. And when you are true to yourself and when you can trust yourself, and you're part of this small group of people who feel the same way, it is inherently more safe.
yeah, maybe it's actually that you would reduce the differences in space. Maybe something to learn there for Earth.
That's a good one. Yes, true. Wow, that's very good. That's a very good way to look at it, because space needs something new, something we can still imagine about and think about future utopia of dystopians. So I think it's a great way to look at it. And thinking about astronauts also, that what kind of people they are and how they trust themselves so well. And
we would have the luxury of starting from a blank page,
Yeah,
which cannot be replaced anywhere on Earth because everyone has its own history. So that's the opportunity, I guess.
Definitely, yes.
And I wonder though if that is the same in commercial flights, right? Because if you look at how commercial flights have been promoted, and you need to correct me if I'm arguing for wrong perception, but it was a lot based on differences, right? It's like we wanted to make sure that these and these people are represented, at least in the journey up. So I would be fascinated and extremely interested in what the perception was while being there, because I can indeed understand that possibly it just washes off because you were somewhere completely new, and you just have to deal with there's no time for gender bias on Mars, right? It's also a lot about survival, performance, going back into the core of humanity, maybe.
It's also with technology, right? Often they're like, we don't have time for those things. We have to just build those things and bring it to the market, and so it's also something I think I actually agree. Yes. Do we have any questions?
Do you have anything you would like to add, or questions from the audience?
I was wondering. I was wondering, like, what if women get again, like, biologically reduced to their own like biological abilities? Because I think that can also be reproduced there as well, because that's what actually happened in the first place. We were just seen as baby machines. So what would happen on Mars? I would see innovation that actually, like, when we shoved aside again, where we seen as just the reproducers instead of the people in charge.
I think the position of women on Mars.
Yeah. I would say we are not there yet. We are not there, like, to have the first baby on Mars. I don't think anyone in this room would be alive. but I think bringing something into Mars is very expensive. So I doubt that if a female would be ever wishing just to be a reproducer, she would have to have a very special brain as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. It's too expensive to send them. To send any kilos to Mars is very expensive.
From a utopian perspective, though, right? I mean, I think it's a fair question to ask. It does come back to core biological differences between genders. I don't usually do that because it's a dangerous and very slippery slope, but I have large hope on technology when it comes to that, and the idea of how we can equalize biological limitations through technology. And I'm not going to say there's going to be a male pregnancy anytime soon, but I do think if you look at the entire biological reproduction medicine, we've done a lot. So I'm hoping that technology takes care of some of these concerns.
Definitely, because I was just wondering, since the origins of gender inequality stems from that, when we're so reduced to their biological properties. So in a utopian perspective, if there would be pregnancies on Mars, they would then be reproduced cyclically. That was just maybe I'm just thinking far ahead.
No, it's a great question. Think about this kind of things now.
Exactly.
So we know what we can expect and how we can deal with those things. So yes, that's a question.
First of all, thank you for this panel session. My name is Ramon. I'm the National Coordinator for the Space Week, and together with Gabriella and Chantal, we organized this session. So thank you for being here. We talked a lot about commercial space flight, and my question is, as a lobbyist of the European Parliament, there's a lot of policies being made, for example, the Artificial Intelligence Act in April this year, but also for the space program as well, because they focus on Green Deal, digitalization. Do you think policies could play a role in bridging that gender gap as well, from a governmental perspective instead of the commercial perspective? Do you think that's maybe too different?
I'm chuckling because I was part of the journey that was advising the GDPR, right? So, and I know this is a bit of a sideball, but I'm going to come back to your question. Now, I would love to say that I inherently believe in human and corporate change, but I think experience teaches us that regulation and policy is a very, very important part of change. And if you look at people and if you look at corporations, and especially in a global scale, it becomes very, very difficult to foster positive change because we're still in a system where corporations have a maximizing and profit-oriented view, most of them, right? So for them, social responsibility, at least from their perception, is often still quite costly, and especially in the competitive landscape where there's other countries that don't regulate, that is a very, very difficult pathway to push. So I would say not only is it facilitating to have regulatory force, I'll make a very provocative statement and say I'm a huge fan in change by regulatory force.
And I also have my opinion in this one, because I see like the commercial battle between the US and China that is happening right now with technology, and like the entire Europe is outside this battle. Like they lost it already. And the only the only reaction is creating these regulations that are very hard to comply with, and it makes it like very costly. I believe in the intention, like in the spirit of the legislator, but I don't feel that is very well. I don't think it's very efficient, like to tackle the commercial spirit that is needed to make an advancement in this area. But maybe the space industry is the next battle that Europe can step in.
I don't know. I mean, legislation is inherently slow.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate, and that's where the whole problem comes from. But I don't think makes it less necessary. I think it's about pragmatic approaches in legislation. And while I do agree that you said Europe, has lost, and that is actually true from a competitive scale of things. But I think we also do see that there can be very, very valuable output of legislation within the European Union, because consumers change, and also our values are still something that we want to defend. I think the problem is more that legislation, corporation, education, everybody is their own entity, which really, really does not help with pragmatic legislation, right? GDPR was a wonderful example, but so is all the AI frameworks, which they have so much value, but in the end, there's an entity that makes them, there's some advisory folks, but ultimately they are implemented by organizations. So I would just say that as long as we're not able to bring these parties together and think about pragmatic solutions, it's going to be very, very difficult, because we do know, that's factual, that there's a lot of frameworks that are currently not followed. So either they're really enforced globally, which is difficult, or they're at least having a pragmatic view on them, so that corporations have a chance to compete with some of the less regulatory spaces on our planet.
Yeah.
So do you think it's about the top-down approach? It's not the bottom-up? That's the issue?
Yeah, well, both, right? I mean, as I said, I do believe there needs to be a certain enforcement, but because of the fact that our systems are not completely independent, there's lobbyists, there's political relations, there's corporate relations, it can only work if it is, I'd say, both sides.
Yes.
Another question. Do you think that I'm a CEO in a commercial company, and do you think that we are often focusing more on the negative examples than on positive examples? Because if I look to my company, I'm a very successful CEO, but that's because I got already 40 years support of my wife, and we do that together. And 45% of our staff is female, not because I have to, because I think it's the best. and with this 45% I make the most money. But it's a mindset, and we need to conquer the examples of you and other positive examples.
What is the key value that set this success in your company?
If you look to men, we are focused on our work, and we walk through life like this. Women are more looking at the wider aspect of everything what's happening around. If you've got a combination, you can use it, and you're really strong. But only this focus is not good.
I agree with you that positive examples help, right? And there are many. I would still feel that it is a little bit of a dangerous argumentation line to say women are like this, men are like this. It's coming back to what I said about skill set. And there are, I think, males that may inherit that little bit more skill set and females that do. And it could be very well the case that we find that often females, and therefore hiring them is a positive idea. But I would love to hear the argument on the skill level, not on the gender level, right? It's like I'm hiring people who don't have that tunnel view, and coincidentally, in your case, that are female employees. But you're right. I think we tend that's us, that's the media, that's humans. We have a negativity bias, right? But if you look at numbers, that negativity bias is also still something that is quite widespread in the place. And people who are positive examples are often too humble to put themselves forward. That also doesn't help. These two are exceptions.
But if I can imagine that if what you discuss here in this room could be motivated for many women. Oh shit, I can do this too. Actually, I'm not limited too. Yeah. And I think that's the promotion that we need to do, just to show the positives.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think something that with like the government versus like commercial, like space flight and everything, is that commercial is fast. So yes, it also brings good things. But in the end, success is measured by money because that's what drives it. Which means that something that makes a lot of money doesn't always brings the most value for human, like society, basically, or for our well-being, because sometimes it goes too fast and overlooks problems. And that's what government often tries to do. They think about it, they think more about, okay, how does it profit society? And it's not necessarily about, oh, how can we make the most money from it, but it's way slower. And it could be nice if we could kind of find this kind of balance where we can have this speed and this, quick excellence basically on a lot of trial and error without having to discuss it a lot, but also not going too fast and then making mistakes because we think more about, okay, where's the money and how can we get the money, but look more at, okay, what is the value for society? And I think that's something that we have to look for.
Oh, that's very important. That's very interesting because also I think here you hear more the word societal entrepreneur than societal entrepreneurship because of the value that the profit needs to provide. And also it's pushed by regulations with, for example, investments. So like for investment portfolios, they need to invest in ESG factors. So like environmental, social, and governance factors. So it's like exactly trying to tackle this balance between money and government. Yeah, it's something that is happening right now.
It comes back to competition versus collaboration, right? So what you were pointing out was, okay, governmental institutions have certain values and certain skill sets and strength, and so does the corporate sector. And if we're able to merge them, we can possibly make benefit of them. The same for artificial intelligence and human. They have very different skill sets. Collaboratively, if you combine them, they can bring the best. That's why diverse teams are the best teams. The big problem is that you need to create links and you need to create platforms for these links to actually foster. And I think that's where the future lies. And that's not an easy task, but that's a task that we all have ahead of us. Coming out of this mindset of these guys are these guys and this guy at this value and this goal, in the end, I do believe in the good of humanity still. So, and I think we still have that overarching value altogether. But it's a challenge. It's a very difficult challenge.
Yes. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Haven't talked for a while.
Are there freelancers in your in the space community, and how do they contribute in the gender gap? Because I'm a freelancer as well in a different sector, and I hire people because they're less or more expensive or whatever, you know, like you can do this for 55 or 95 an hour and you get this film or something like that. Okay, I'm gonna look at that. So how is it in your sector?
Well, right now, I was saying, again, I'm going to share my personal experience. I was saying that I was an early career researcher, so I'm not affiliated to any, I'm not a PhD candidate, for example. I'm more of an independent researcher right now, so you could see it as a freelance researcher. How is it contributing to a gender gap? Well, I think in my field, in academic research, freelancing is not democratized that much. There are a few platforms where you can find pools of freelance researchers, but I'm not sure if it's the best solution, because you can find researchers from lower income countries working for, sometimes there's like $1, $2 per hour. So I don't think that it's necessarily a good thing. It's not bridging any gap in, not necessarily gender gap, just a diversity gap, I would say.
And the tendency that we see in space, so essentially governmental, like historical spaces like governments being big, sturdy satellites, tons, sending them into space, and they are like cathedral of science, right?
Yeah.
And the tendency that we are seeing now that smaller is good as well, right? So we have this tendency, what's called new space, where you are faster, you are smaller, you are lighter, and you still achieve really good results. And so we have this tendency of going from like really massive companies that will still exist and still have their place in the landscape to smaller and smaller initiatives. So maybe why not freelancers? I mean, it's possible you have free available, for example, Earth observation data. Anyone in this room can go and download like all the archive and do amazing work, data science or like art on it. And it's available for everyone. So I mean, I think with the opening of data and also the lowering the barriers of access to space, there is more and more space for smaller initiatives that still make an impact. So,
And is it the freelancing by necessity or freelancing by choice? I think that is the two sides that these girls are actually looking at, right? In other industries, we make that distinguishment. And freelancing by necessity would be you are not able to find stable employment, and then it's very, very bad for equality. If you freelance by choice and you make that choice because of the benefits that you just laid out, then it can contribute to better diversity and inclusion. I don't know at all how it is in the space industry, but in the tech industry, it is often, unfortunately, freelancing by necessity, and that's not always facilitating.
Other questions? No? Well, thank you so much. It was a very interesting panel. Want to add something or anything else? Or questions for each other?
Well, thanks for organizing.
Very welcome. So thank you. It was very interesting, very insightful too. I think also for the audience, something very new. And we tackled different kind of topics about the peers and mentorship. I think that's amazing. That's something we can really try to do right now, but also thinking about the future. So I wish you good luck with the Womers Foundation. I think it's amazing. The first time I saw it, I was like, whoa, this is so awesome. So I had to bring it today here. So, and also Andrea for your STEM field knowledge. It's very interesting, your inputs, and also Enrique technology. So it was very insightful for me and interesting to be part of your discussion.
Yeah, I'm curious and excited to follow your journeys.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.